crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds,
So my amendment will require the National Archive and Records Administration to create a collection of records from across government agencies that can be declassified for the public's use, similar to the approach used in 1992 with the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act. These records will carry a presumption of immediate disclosure, which means they can only remain classified with good reason.
Welcome to Unauthorized Disclosures. I'm your host, Anthony Kimmery, a former counterintelligence analyst with as high of a security clearance as they come, and a multi-award-winning journalist and editor. Before I jump into this, I want it on the record that I am indeed all in for disclosure, whether that be the disclosure of what the U.S. government, more specifically the Pentagon, knows about extraterrestrial life and its technologies, or whether it be the disclosure of secreted extraordinary advances in terrestrial technology. So yeah, bring on the damn disclosure. Just as long as it does not jeopardize legitimately classified technology that's essential for our national defense and does not jeopardize sources and methods of vital intelligence collection platforms or puts individuals' lives at risk. The topic of this report unquestionably is going to piss off some people and give true believers a really bad case of heartburn. The bottom line is this: don't trust anything that comes out of a career politician's mouth. As unpleasant and as disheartening as you may find what I have to say, I believe it's imperative that you know and realize that things are not always what they seem, and that there is still a lot of work ahead to move the needle in the right direction. The inward pressures on this matter are enormous. On July 13th, New York Senator and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer became the unlikely hero of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Disclosure Movement when he put forth Senate Amendment 797 to the National Defense Authorization Act for Fiscal Year 2024, referred to as the NDAA. Schumer's UAP Disclosure Act amendment was passed by the Senate as an amendment to the Senate's version of the NDAA. But that doesn't mean it will be preserved when, in the coming months, leaders from the Senate and the House meet in conference committee to reconcile the two chambers' respective versions of the bill to produce a compromise bill, which then must go back to both respective chambers of Congress for yet another vote. Not until both chambers pass one version of the defense spending authorization bill does it go to the president to sign into law. What, in my observation, the UFO disclosure movement collectively seems to not be aware of is that Chuck Schumer has long been a major Senate recipient of military-industrial complex largesse in the form of not insignificant campaign contributions. This is the same military-industrial complex that President Dwight Eisenhower warned about in his famous farewell speech, and the same military-industrial complex that UAP disclosure supporters believe is hiding not only crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft, but also the bodies of those spacecraft's deceased occupants. Schumer is the dean of New York's congressional delegation and hasn't and doesn't really need the military-industrial complex's money to get reelected every 4 years, as he hasn't faced a legitimate challenge for his Senate seat since he won it in 1999. But he does take the money of one of the military-industrial complex's biggest players, and that would be the Lockheed Martin Corporation. Why? Well, because he likes to make sure the handful of Lockheed Martin's biggest manufacturing facilities remain in New York. Cumulatively, they bring in substantial tax and other revenue, not to mention the many thousands of his constituents the plants keep employed. Schumer has been very good at bringing home the bacon, as port politics is so affectionately referred to. Lockheed Martin is one of the members of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about, and which UAP disclosure campaigners seem to believe has benefited perhaps the most from extraterrestrial technology. It is also the nation's and perhaps the world's largest defense contractor. It is a $50 billion company whose infamous Skunk Works has churned out America's most secret aircraft. The Skunk Works has a nearly 80-year track record in developing classified aircraft, systems, and technologies that push the boundaries of what is possible. Last year, Lockheed Martin was awarded contracts by the U.S. Department of Defense worth a staggering $45.68 billion, which made up nearly 70% of Lockheed Martin's annual revenue, 85% of Lockheed Martin's work for the military is classified and is, as the company says, executed in secrecy to protect national security and to ensure that the U.S. Armed Forces maintain an edge over any threat. Schumer has long been one of Lockheed Martin's top campaign benefactors on Capitol Hill. He was at the top of the pyramid of the 20 top recipients of defense sector campaign contributions in the last election cycle, and was one of the 45 senators who secured earmarks worth $1.8 billion for defense contractors in the end-of-year spending bill, who received an average of 51% more in campaign contributions from the defense sector than his Senate colleagues. Senator Marco Rubio, incidentally, a Republican who was among the 5 senators who co-sponsored Schumer's UAP Disclosure Act amendment, was the 4th top recipient of military-industrial complex campaign cash during the last election cycle. In 2013, after years of advocacy on behalf of Lockheed Martin to grow and maintain its presence in New York, the company threatened to leave the state. Schumer made sure that didn't happen. And in 2017, the U.S. Army awarded Lockheed Martin a $1.6 billion contract for radar to track incoming rockets and artillery. In 2019, the company was awarded one of its largest defense contracts, a new Army contract worth up to $3 billion to build a new generation of radars capable of detecting low-flying aircraft and missiles. Those contracts were on top of the billions that had already been given in contracts. It's because of Schumer's advocacy that Lockheed Martin has continued its operations in New York, where it's now stronger than ever, with the largest workforce there in 10 years. And that is on top of Schumer's advocacy for the company's growth in other areas of New York, including the Southern Tier, where Schumer successfully helped secure a $1.2 billion contract for a Lockheed Martin facility to build a new fleet of Marine One helicopters to ferry around the President of the United States. So, one kind of has to ask, who is beholden to whom? In their draft plan to shut down one of its New York facilities, Lockheed Martin executives warned that the shutdown would have political consequences for the company. The draft plan noted that there would be strong opposition by members of the New York congressional delegation and that it would most certainly be a big burr under the saddle of Chuck Schumer, as it would not reflect well on his high-profile advocacy of Lockheed Martin programs in New York. So, given Schumer's cozy relationship with America's biggest defense contractor, the same defense contractor, mind you, who builds the nation's most secret aircraft, and which UAP disclosure backers believe may possess alien spaceships in the bodies of their deceased occupants, he isn't likely going to be biting the hand that feeds him. Indeed, upon close scrutiny of his vaunted UAP disclosure amendment, and it becomes glaringly obvious that it is not going to do what UAP disclosure champions seem convinced it will do. The moral of this story is this, and I do know what I speak. In Washington, D.C., on the Hill, and across the Potomac, things are not always what they seem to be. The well-worn adage is, if it seems too damn good to be true, it probably is. Or, to use Politico vernacular, politicians are, well, politicians. You don't believe what they say, you watch what they do, and you never, ever hold your breath. The fact is, if you understand the language of Schumer's amendment, and understanding the language of legislative language is paramount to understanding what a bill or amendment will and will not do, it will do the exact opposite of what disclosure promoters believe it will. What it in the end does is to vest ultimate authority over UAP information declassification in the hands of the president, any president. Somehow, I don't believe that that's what UAP disclosure advocates, including myself, had in mind, the vesting of the ultimate power over UAP information declassification in the hands of the president, any president, going forward. But that's precisely what Schumer's amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act will do if it ultimately makes its way into the final defense authorization bill that's passed by both the House and the Senate. Coming up next, a first-hand insider's look inside the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and an investigation into the generals and civilian leaders of the Pentagon, who are the ones Congress should be serving with subpoenas to testify about what they know, either publicly or in executive session. Until next time, my friends, stay well, safe, and frosty out there.
Renewed faith in tomorrow. Bring a better day. And I'm humbled by the trust and confidence you placed in me. I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide, but unify. Who doesn't see red states and blue states, only sees the United States. and work with all my heart, with the confidence of the whole people, to win the confidence of all of you.
Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.